Hi, everybody, and welcome back to A Catholic's Perspective, the podcast all about being a young Catholic surviving in a secular world. Today, I have a special guest with us. We have Alec Torres. I'm so excited because we're discussing his newest book that he wrote with Jacob, right? Joshua?
Joshua.
Joshua.
Joshua Charles.
Yes, Joshua Charles. I'm friends with him on Twitter, actually. It's quite interesting. I always get his name wrong, though. And so we're going to be discussing their new book, Persecuted Within. And I think it's a big topic. A lot of people are struggling with this right now. So we're going to kind of talk about that and how to handle it. So welcome, Alec. Thank you so much for being here. Did you want to introduce yourself to the listeners a little bit?
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I'm this is actually my first book I've ever written with my name on it cuz really I'm a ghostwriter. So I've written other books before, you just never know. I Josh and I we met back when we were working at the White House together actually. We were both White House speechwriters. And that place was brimming with Catholics. So we met each other there. And then after the administration, we kind of started talking. I had the idea for the book, and then boom, went off from that point. So luckily, both of us have fled DC. I now live in Texas with my family, wife, and kids. So that's just a little bit about me.
Wow, good for you. Yeah, I heard DC is kind of the worst. My fiance wanted to go to the Catholic College of America out there, and it's like, ooh, I don't know. And now he's looking at Notre Dame instead.
Yeah, I can understand why. I mean, I loved DC when I was there, but it had a heck of a turn in 2020. I mean, I know a lot of places did, but I don't like going back. And pretty much everyone I knew who lived there now does not. They either
Mm.
left the city entirely or moved to the suburbs because you just can't go in the city that much anymore.
Yeah, that's kind of how most of the big cities are. New York is like that now. Chicago's like that. I'm from
Mhm.
Chicago, so that's
Oof.
like, we go into the city and we we hope we come out.
Right, right. Yeah, it's well, everyone's dealing with it, but some of us have just decided to flee away to 10 acres out in Texas like me.
Wow. Wow, 10 acres. What do you
Yeah,
do
no,
with
and I'm
that?
a suburban kid too, so it's like it's not my style. I have three brothers, and they joke with me. They're like, this like bookish kid over there. The writer is the one who would decided to go and buy a bunch of land, like you weirdo.
You know what? It gives you space to write though, you don't have all the crazy noise and everything, so maybe it helps?
Oh no, I love it. Yeah, it's way better than working in a city.
Oh, I can imagine the cars and the people and the yeah, oh. We just came from the city because we just had spiritual direction, and I
Mm,
just oh, it's so, like after being in the city, I need to sit down for, like, an hour and a half and do nothing. I need to watch paint dry.
right? No, my wife and I even talk about sometimes we're like, oh, maybe we should get in like a cabin up in the mountains in the woods somewhere even further away from people. And then I have to worry about, being actually a misanthrope by the end. Maybe I should completely detach myself from the world. The
That
internet
sounds about
can't be
right.
my only connection with other people.
I mean, it could be. You just get a chapel built up there, you have a priest that visits once a month or something, like, it's fine, probably. No, I love that. Well, I'm very happy to have you on, and so, yeah, our topic today is a very I say a current topic, but it's always been a current topic ever since
Mhm.
Judas. We always knew that there were going to be wolves in sheep's clothing, and the church isn't exempt from that, and I've been telling people that for years, and, with the rise of social media, I really feel like there has been a lot more persecution and pressure put on the leaders of our church. There are a lot of things that are taken out of context. People only like to read the titles and they don't actually read the documents themselves. Or, yeah, actual persecution is happening from the leaders potentially. And how do we handle that? And so I'm really excited to discuss this book. I think it's really important. And I know a lot of people that were super excited to know we were doing a podcast. So,
I'm good. Thanks.
yeah. So, I guess kind of just diving in really quick. I always ask this when it comes to, authors and what inspired you to write this book with, oh my goodness, every time.
Yeah, Joshua again. Yeah. Oh, well, it's tough because he has two first names, right? So like people
Yep.
often call him like, oh, with Charles. I'm like, yeah, Josh Charles, or Joshua Charles.
Mhm.
Like, it's fine.
Yeah.
Luckily, he's a good guy, so he'll be very forgiving about it. And you got my name right. Half the people I talk to call me Alex still, so
It's the
uh,
C.
yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to be proud with this in any way, but the idea kind of came in a flash. I feel as if the you know whether the Holy Spirit or my guardian angel, I'm not really spiritually perceptive enough to tell yet. But somebody up in the spiritual realm was just kicking me all of a sudden, saying, "Hey, this would be a good idea." And I mean, it all stemmed from the same thoughts going on. I'm a convert. Josh is a convert too. Very excited about the church, jumping in. And, we didn't come in with rose colored glasses, but especially as you get deeper and deeper in the faith, you start to pay attention to church politics a little more. You start to see some of the scandals going on a little bit more deeply. And I just had this question, like, how am I supposed to deal with that? What am I supposed to do as just a normal lay Catholic? Or, for priests out there, you're not in a leadership position, you're not a bishop or a cardinal or something, but how am I supposed to act? If I hear a priest, which has happened, and I'm sure it's happened to people listening to this, just literally say something heretical from the pulpit, do I have to obey? Do I not? I'm a good Catholic. Like, where's the lines? So, long story short, I thought, well, like, why don't we just ask people who have done it before? Why don't we ask saints? Like, that's what Catholics do. We look to the saints and find out how they lived their lives. So we tried to find saints who were persecuted by the church hierarchy itself and how they dealt with it, the rules that they followed, the ways that they acted, and things like that. So, it just sort of hit me. And when I found out nobody else had written the book, it slowly dawned on me that maybe I was going to have to do it myself.
I love how God kind of is like, "Yeah, this is your job now." He doesn't
Yeah,
qualify.
and let's be honest, like, I wasn't really looking forward to it either. We cut a lot of the citations out because it was too unwieldy, but my goodness, historical research, I feel bad for post-grad students out there.
Oh my gosh, yeah, I can imagine, especially, like, having to get all of it, like, that's the thing when I hear about these authors writing these types of books is, like, you have to have the accurate accounts, you have to
Mhm.
find the original sources, and most original sources for these saints, they're all dead, they're deceased, that no, they don't exist anymore.
Yeah, it was a lot of digging up, and then, things are translated or they weren't translated or they
Mhm.
were translated weirdly, and it's kind of a mess. But I figured that I'm a convert. I didn't go to seminary. I'm not a theologian or anything like that. I don't really have a lot. I can't stand up on a pulpit and tell everyone, "Hey, this is how you're supposed to act," because what do I know?
Mm.
So the only thing I could do was say, "How did these people act?" and then tell everyone else what I learned.
Absolutely, and I think that's really where we need to understand that, like, this is something that's been happening throughout church history. Like I said, and you mentioned in the book, starting with Judas Iscariot, like, we go all the way back to literally the 12 disciples, like, or
Mhm.
the 12 apostles, whatever. It's like, it's crazy. I know I haven't had coffee yet today. I'm floundering here. Um, but it's interesting to me because we have this pattern of behavior, and we've seen this in history, not just in Catholicism, but throughout history. There has always been the exact same issues, but in different fonts, and we've always been fighting the exact same things over and over again. And in the church, it's no different. We've been fighting these things for years, these heresies, these issues. We've always had a saint talk about something like this or experience something like this, but in a different time, in a different font, so to speak.
Mhm.
And so when it comes to, the church and what it's going through today, people get really discouraged because it's all over the internet, it's all over the news. The pope did this, the cardinal did that, the sex scandals, this and that. And I can't blame them for feeling a little disheartened because as a Catholic, if I was, a Catholic that was consistently consuming that kind of news
Mhm.
and negativity, I too would be like, is this where I'm supposed to be? So what would you, from your own experience as well as a convert and just from the book, what would you say to people who are, jumping overboard? They're leaving the church because of the hierarchy.
Mhm. Well, first, not advice I normally throw out, but I would just say stop reading the news as much. I was even a speechwriter for President Trump, and I limited my news consumption as much as possible, like bare minimum that I needed to do to get the job done, because you can always do something much more fulfilling. And you need to know. It's not bad to know. It's good for us to be informed, but that's just a good, very practical way to start. The second thing is, and this is why oddly enough, I tell people about this book and they're like, "Oh wow, what a great, positive subject. How nice of you to write this thing about all these, extremely holy people who were persecuted or even martyred by their own bishop or the hierarchy. Wow, great and positive." But in reality, it actually kind of is. If you have a more historical understanding, if you can see things through like to take the Prince of Egypt, right? Look through heaven's eyes. If you can
Mm,
kind of just take that step back, you can see that we operate in days and news cycles, maybe weeks or years, maybe if we're lucky even decades, but God operates over centuries, over generations, over lifetime upon lifetime. And time and again he pulls out not just clarity from confusing times or rectifying bad situations, but even glory
mm,
from these evils. It's the story of the cross over and over and over again. It's tough for the saints because many times, they die before they can see their cause justified, before they can see themselves justified. But if they're in the right, and the saints are, because they're saints, they're justified in the end. So it's a very beautiful thing, and I think if we can hold on to that, we can accept that God didn't put us here to know the answers to every question. He didn't put us here to know the day and the hour. He put us here to do as best as we can in our circumstances. So if we
mm.
know that the church is the true church, yes, I would say we are dealing with some unique circumstances. It's been bad before, certainly. Problems have existed in every age of the church. So if you want a perfect church, it ain't going to happen. But yes, our problems are, just as an example, you don't in the past you don't see the Pope being the source of controversy and confusion nearly as much as we do today. And
True.
that's a tough thing for Catholics to swallow. We have to deal with that in a new way. But if you know the church is true, if you know that there is no other church but the church that Christ himself instituted, then you got to see it through with faith, and God will reward us for that.
Absolutely. 100%. It reminds me of, a comment that was left underneath one of my posts the other day. And basically, this person was saying that they gave up being Catholic because of, the Pope and all of the, sketchy things going on. And I responded because this was his exact quote. He said, "I gave up being Catholic, watching the Pope do some awful, sketchy things, but we all know Satan is the master manipulator." And I'm like, yes, of course, Satan is the master manipulator. But also, I told him, I'm like, "But Satan just manipulated you out of the Catholic Church." And at
Hmm.
the end of the day, like, don't let Satan win. Don't jump overboard. We've had worse popes in the past, and what the pope does doesn't affect your salvation. But you know what does affect your salvation? Leaving the
Hmm.
Catholic Church, because there is no salvation outside of the Catholic Church. And people don't understand what that means. It just means that, for those who are listening who don't understand, no salvation outside of the Catholic Church means that if you are Catholic, or it's been revealed to you that the Catholic Church is the one true church of Christ, it's truth in itself, it's goodness, then there is no salvation for you outside of the church. You can't find it in another denomination, or sorry, we're a branch, but you know what I mean. And so you won't find it anywhere else. And so I see these comments probably at least 40, 50 times a day on posts that I make. Oh, I used to be Catholic. Oh, I'm not
Hmm.
Catholic anymore. I'm set of a contest or this or that. And we're seeing big numbers jump overboard, and it's not good. Like, this is exactly what Satan wants.
Yeah.
Um, and I forget who had that vision about, I don't know if it was obviously private revelation, but that vision of, Satan getting 100 years to turn
Hmm.
people against God. God gave him like 100 years. And I don't know whether or not that's true, but I definitely see Satan getting a bigger
Seems likely.
foothold. Yes, exactly. He's getting a bigger foothold, and we don't have the same courageous, we might have them. I mean, I know a few people, but I mean, I could be wrong, but I just feel like back then, Saint Joan of Arc, Saint Bruno, Saint, all they were so strong. They were strong Catholics. People rallied behind them despite the fact that they faced persecution. Saint Athanasius, he was what?
Mhm.
He got kicked out like what, 5 times?
Yeah, I
He
think it
had
was
to
like
go.
6 exiles in the end.
Like, bruh, that's a lot. And most of us aren't even willing to fast during Lent. Like,
Hmm.
I hate to say it, but I feel like there's this pandemic of lukewarm Catholicism. Do you agree?
Yeah, we started the book kind of right with that. Like if we're not used to suffering or if we don't know how to deal with it, it could be just our own comfort and lukewarmness. And it's not bad to recognize that. I don't think we need to to lean into the mortification metaphors going on.
Mm,
We don't need to flagellate ourselves over that because we are born in a soft time, um, and we can start to correct that. But there's so many things you said in that I'd love to touch on. One of
yeah.
them is just to clarify with people because I'm dealing with it. So my cousin is returning to the church right now, and every other week or so she calls me and she's like, "Well, maybe I'm going to back out because I was thinking about what the Pope said on this, or I'm like, is he like actually a communist?" And all these things happen, and it's a good thing for us Catholics to recognize, whether you're sedevacantist or whether you are, a low church Protestant or something like that. The root is the same. You have this false view of what the papacy is supposed to be. If you
Mm,
think that being a Catholic means that we literally just have to believe and follow anything that the Pope says, that's incorrect. And we've been lulled into that sense with a series of pretty good popes over, relatively recent memory. And now we're in a situation where it's confusing. And oftentimes we look at what the Pope says and we're like, I am finding it very difficult to interpret this in a charitable and doctrinally correct light. And we do our best. But the point is, it's tough. I think that just forces us to recognize that God has made it such that we're in a time where the Pope is even a source of confusion, who is supposed to be the source of our clarity, and that's one of our crosses to bear in this time. But we also recognize as Catholics that God didn't make us to be in Joan of Arc's time. He didn't make us to be in Saint Athanasius's time or Saint Bruno's time. He made us to be right here and right now. And he's going to give us every single grace that we need to be right here and right now with the problems that we face. So for anybody who is thinking about turning away or is wondering how can the Catholic Church be real or true or be what it says it is in the face of these problems that we have now, that's when you need to kneel before God with even greater fervor than before and say, just give me the faith and the strength to overcome this and deal with this. Whatever understanding I need, please grant that to me. And whatever you don't want to grant that to me, help me to accept that. Because
mm,
ultimately, Christ wants us to come in humbly. And if we have to accept that humbly in our brains too, humbly in our intellects, not understanding everything fully, then God's will be done. I don't need to know why the Pope, when the Pope can be right and wrong, and or when he becomes an overt heretic or a quasi heretic or whatever the qualifications are. I don't need to know any of that to be a faithful Catholic and go to heaven. So focus on what matters to your salvation.
amen. I love how you put that. I think that's such a good reminder, and I haven't even thought about it in that sense. I think, I forget who said it, but you were built or you were created for times such as these. I
Mhm.
always forget. In Saint Catherine of Siena, maybe I don't
I'm
know.
terrible with this. I have to pull out a quote book every time I go for them, and half the time on the internet they're attributed wrongly anyway.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, there's all these quotes out there that and then we get the book that says, things saints never said, and apparently Saint Padre Pio never said, "Pray, hope, and don't worry," apparently, and I'm like, "Okay, but does it matter because it helps people?" Like, I don't know. He probably could have said something like that. I don't know. But I think that's so important because so many people get caught up in this whirlwind of drama and news and politics and then they start resonate like they hone in on it. I can think of quite a few Catholic YouTubers who do this as well. I try to stay away from church politics as much as I can just because people are sick of it. People are
Mhm.
sick of the negativity. They're sick of hearing what Pope Francis is doing. And why should it matter? Pope Francis, again, does not determine whether or not you go to heaven or hell. You determine that. You choose God. And if you choose God and you're in a proper state in life, you're in a state of grace and you're doing, what you need to do, you're doing God's will, you're fine. Like
Mhm.
second coming comes tomorrow, you should be fine. And I think
Yeah.
so many people forget in the words of Saint Therese of Lisieux that the world is our ship, not our home.
Yeah. And it's I think one of the great things too we have here as Catholics is that we have a repository of faith. We have a magisterium that we can lean on too. So I mean, this would be in many ways the difficulties, we're focusing on the Pope right now. When he says something confusing or that seems like it's an error, it's tough for Catholics because of the bold claims we make about the Pope, who the Pope is. and the type of authority that he has. But in many other ways, it's actually it would be almost harder if you're, say, just, a Baptist or somebody where it's just your pastor and your congregation kind of thing. Because yes, we make all these big bold claims about the Pope, but we also know what the truth is. And if we don't know what the truth is, we can darn well figure it out. We have catechisms, we have historical
Mm,
documents, we have you know councils. And it takes time, it takes effort, but everything in our faith life takes effort. Our will is the main thing we need to shape, but our intellect we need to shape too. So for that, if we're ever confused about something, okay, well then boom, we have the Bible and 2,000 years of church fathers and history and doctrines and development, or expositions on doctrines, all there at our fingertips to pull from. And then we can look at things dispassionately. Whereas if we really were just sort of us and our Bible and a preacher, it would be a lot more shocking. It'd be a lot more troublesome if the preacher started going astray, because then bam, we got to move churches or something like that. For
yep.
us, if our pastors are wrong, we can say why and quote the document. In the end, it's not great. We wish we didn't have to. Maybe we are not even called to, but at least we can know still what's right. So yeah, it's uncomfortable. It's a hard situation to be in. It'd be much easier if we could just look, if your father, if you could just trust literally everything your father said and everything your father did. But no father's ever going to be like that. Some fathers are worse than others. But you're always going to have to be able to make some decisions on your own or come to your own understanding of things anyway, properly formed.
Exactly, 100%, and I always think, what you were saying earlier, it's like, you literally have a device that can look up anything in a couple seconds and you still think Catholics worship Mary? Like, bruh, come on. Like, how
Right?
many
It's like
times?
willfully wanting to misbelieve things.
'Cause I understand the younger generation, right? The younger ones who have had, Bible verses drilled into them, and they're Protestants, so they were raised by these hardcore Protestant, and they're young, they're inexperienced, they're learning. But I'm talking about the straight up adults that are, like, in their 30s or 40s, and I'm not saying, God can work in their heart, whenever and wherever they're open to his grace, and so, it's all in God's timing. But sometimes I'm just flabbergasted. I don't Is that still a word people use?
I,
Flabbergasted?
I I use it.
Okay, cool. Awesome. But it's like something that I'm just like, "Really? Like, you're in your 40s, you've had 40 years, you had 4 decades on this earth, and you still think that everything the Pope says is infallible." Like, papal infallibility
Mhm.
only really works once every, like, 4 years when he's already preaching on doctrine that's already been approved. Like, it's not his words, his opinion is not infallible. W I
Mhm.
I can't. It's just so crazy to me when I'm talking to people and then they'll engage with me. They'll be like, "Oh yeah, like what do you think about this?" And I'm like, "Oh, well, you know what? Catholic Answers actually has a really great article." And they're like, "Yeah, I don't want to read that." And I'm like, "Can you they're like, "Can you
Mhm.
summarize?" I'm like, "It takes like 10 minutes. If not
Yeah.
like if you are really in a search for truth, 10 minutes
Exactly.
is
I think
nothing."
that shows the seriousness or lack of seriousness of people's faith, because I see people. I'd rather have somebody genuinely, it's like debating an atheist who's just like
Mhm.
almost angry about my beliefs. I'd almost rather have that than the Catholic who's like, I just don't know if I can be a Catholic anymore based on what's going on. And I'm like, well, what have you been reading? What have you been focused on? How's your prayer been? Have you gone on retreat over this? Like what are you doing within your own spiritual life to engage with this and wrestle with God like Jacob and kind of figure out what's going on. Because if you turn to God and you ask Him, He will help you. And then it's like, I don't really pray. It's kind of takes a lot of time. Or usually I just, I pray for some things that I may need or whatever. I'm not praying for, what do you read? It's like, read. I don't really read. It's like, come
Mhm.
on. How much do you really care about your faith? I don't want to. I don't want to judge people harshly. I don't know all their situations, but sometimes I do think that we can get a little lazy with it.
Absolutely. And I definitely think, we all go through a dry season, but something I like to remember people is that saints are people just who just never gave up, right? They're people who continuously, whether they fell or into sin or because they messed up because we're human, we have a choice to begin again every single day that God allows us on this earth, right? And
Hmm.
one of the little girls I babysit, she saw this meme that says, "The Lord yeeteth and he yoinketh away." And now that's what just comes into my mind whenever that Job quote comes up. And
Yeah.
I'm like, "Thanks, Maddie. I love you so much." But I just noticed that, I've gone through dry spells, but I'm like, I'm not giving up though, because I think
Mhm.
a lot of the times God will put us through tests to see if we are truly in love with him or we're
Mhm.
in love with the way it looks or the way that he makes us feel. But when
Yeah.
he puts us through those dry seasons, those desolation seasons, that's when we have to actively choose him and force ourselves to love him even when we don't feel like it, even when it's difficult.
That is the story of every single saint at one point or another. Some for longer stretches, some not as long, but it's always there. This feeling like God doesn't care about me, or things don't make sense, or you know I need to pray. You like the times you pull out your rosary and you're like, I can pray my rosary, and the times you're like, oh my Lord, every bead is painful, and I don't want to do this right now anymore. I'm just sick of it. I don't want to go to mass. It's sickening to me, and that
Mhm,
happens, and you're exactly right with that, that God wants to draw us out, and this is the beautiful thing about our understanding of the cross, though. I used to be Protestant, and it's just, and I love Protestants. My whole family's Protestant, so I don't want to knock them here, but I think Catholics just have this intensely rich understanding for those who decide to look into it of the redemptive power of the cross, to know that actually those times in which we don't feel it or don't understand it and persevere through those moments are even more grace filled than when we're being filled with consolations from God. You know,
mhm,
it's this is where I think we can transform our perspective to be one of negativity, where we're abusing ourselves or abusing the church, or just thinking I'm done with this, to having almost a holy excitement. Um, I tell people this. One of the people who endorsed our book was Bishop Strickland. He read it and reviewed it before he was booted out of the diocese of Tyler, but I can see God's work in my own perspective on this, because I know before this were if that were to happen, I think he's a holy man, a good man. I can see all sorts of people who need censure that aren't him, and yet he gets punished. And before, I probably would have been very negative about this and thought, God, what could you possibly be doing? Why don't you change this? How do you allow this to happen? And instead, when we can have the perspective of the cross, all of a
mhm.
sudden it's like, okay, Lord, what are you doing with this then? Where the graces that are going to come out of this suffering, in the church, in my life, whatever it is, those graces that are going to come out are much greater than if everything was just happy go lucky. And I don't even know if I'm going to see what those graces are, but he's going to pull them out. So I don't know. The saints, you read it time and again, they get excited about suffering in a way that to the world would seem perverse or moribund, but as we recognize as Catholics, is them just having this immense trust in God.
Absolutely. And you brought up Bishop Strickland. I love Bishop Strickland. I met him back in 2022, 2021, 2022, at SoCo, which was in Colorado. And he was just such a joy. Like being able to just sit down, have dinner with him, and talk to him over some drinks and just get to know him as a person was just so wonderful. And my first inclination when I heard about what was going on and him being suppressed and being kicked out of the Tyler, my first inclination was like, "Oh, I stand with Bishop Strickland and this and that." Who am I? Who I have no authority. We say I stand with blank. And it's good to support them, but I feel like it can also be a source of pride for Catholics at times. Not all of them, of course, but where we're like, oh, I'm fighting for a cause and I'm doing this. God's fighting for the cause. God saw it. God knows what's going on. God knows the full story. And,
Mhm.
who's ever guilty will be tried for that. Like, there are things that I feel like we want to take into our own hands, but at the end of the day, we end up looking more like King Henry going in and raiding the Pope and trying to kidnap him and throwing him in jail like he did in the book, than we are actually trying to solve issues, right? We look like we're these tyrants trying to and tyrants don't change minds, they just make people fear them. Um but when I saw that and I was like, "You know what? What is going to do more good? Me posting I stand with Bishop Strickland or me fasting and praying for him in private?" Like out
Mm.
of those 2, what's actually going to make a difference? And I think social media has warped that where we kind of we think, "Oh, if we post this, then that's helping." How is that helping? he's never gonna see that. I mean, yeah, you can give him support, you can write him a letter and be like, "I support you," but posting that on social, what is that gonna do? I mean, news articles are already bringing awareness to it, you know? So to me, I think the real change comes when we're offering our sufferings up for these people and, we connect with them by writing them letters, and things like that.
Yeah, it's the I mean, this is one of the great things that we have at our disposal. And again, so much of this I do think is just engaging in the spiritual realm more intentionally. And it shapes our perspective of the world, and it shapes our response to what the world throws at us, because all of a sudden we can get very frustrated when our response is something like activism, or posting on social media or whatever it is, because we want to act. Human beings, God gave us the desire. He instilled in all of us, if unless we're just totally lethargic, to want to respond and to do justice in the world. And yet we are limited, finite, individual human beings. So in this age in which we can see problems from all across the world, we can feel like we want to get involved in it. We're called to love all of mankind. Why shouldn't I be able to get involved in it? And yet our participation in that realm is so paltry, when meanwhile you could just be like a stay-at-home mom who, in the moment at which her, like, infant who has a fever is crying while her 3-year-old has decided to throw a tantrum, while like the 5-year-old is literally coloring on the walls, and you just can't deal with it all at the same time. You decide to take that split second to go to Saint, which saint was it? Everyone will know when I say it, or those who know will know when I say it, but that interior cell in your
Mm,
heart, and to just turn to God for that briefest of moments, and to both recognize his presence there, but also add your sufferings in a prayer that can't even be spoken because you don't even have the time to put a single word to it. That right there could do more than 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 words on a page. That's the beautiful thing in our faith, and none of that is seen. I try to remind myself that some cloistered nun is converting more souls than will ever even see the cover of my book. That's not to say my book is worthless, or that God isn't going to do something with it. I pray that he does, but we have to recognize where our value lies, and that is where it is, because all of us can do that. Every single human being can participate in Calvary, which means participating in Easter, which means participating in the resurrection of our own souls and the resurrection of the souls of others. And we have the opportunity, not we don't have to face it, sadly, but every single day, literally every single day, we have the opportunity, whether we like to or not. It could be Lent where you choose it, or just could be a normal day where all of a sudden your tire goes flat when you're on a date night and you have to deal with it. That's your opportunity right there. You see things like that, all of a sudden you make yourself see things like that by force of your will, and trusting that God's grace will fill you up on top of that. And then boom, all of a sudden the crisis in the church, okay, I can face that. That's fine. I don't know where God's taking it, but I'm along for the ride, and I'm thrilled about it.
absolutely. And I love that because I definitely think there are so many moments in our lives where there is suffering, there is sorrow, there, and even if it's for a split second because you stub your toe, I mean, it doesn't matter. All of those things are efficacious. We can make those things into prayers. And one of my spiritual director, he's fantastic. He told me, he was like, sometimes a 30-second prayer is more efficacious than 2-hour long prayer. Like, depending on if your heart's in it, what you're doing, sometimes it only takes 30 seconds to have a wonderful prayer moment, and it doesn't have to be out there for everyone to see. I think also with social media, we have this thing where it's like, oh, I have to prove to everybody that I'm a good Catholic, that I'm doing this. I mean, Ash Wednesday's proof of that. Everyone has to post about their ashes. I'm not saying every single person does it, but it's very popular. I did it. I'm not, I'm a hypocrite here. I did it. But it's something that I noticed where I was really thinking about not posting it. But then people were constantly just pestering me like, "Did you get your ashes? Did you get your ashes?" I'm like, "Well, it's not a holy day of obligation, but yes, I did. Thank you for your concern." And it's like I love being able to share that side of myself with people, but I notice my followers especially feel this pressure, to constantly
Mhm,
prove to the world that they are a good Catholic, but at the same time not wanting to go against the world because that creates enemies in a way. Or
mhm.
so I see them really struggling with that. Do you have the same experience, or can you speak about that a bit?
Well, I think the Lord knew that I would have that exact same weakness, so He just set up my life such that it would almost be beaten out of me, right? Like I like I said in the beginning, I'm a ghostwriter by trade. So I would write speeches for the President of the United States that he would then go up and deliver that nobody is ever supposed to know that I wrote.
Right.
So I get some, I guess, a bit of pride in getting to tell people, oh, I had that job. Sure, the job was me sitting in front of a word processor for like 14 hours a day. Like it wasn't as glitz and glam as people might think. Loved it, but people can get the wrong ideas sometimes. But at the same time, I don't get to walk out there and be like, look at me. I'm such a cool writer. I'm so great. And you do that time and time again. And all of a sudden, the only way, I mean, writers, ghostwriters, speechwriters, they're filled, at least in DC that I saw, they're filled with Catholics. And
Mm,
in many ways, I think it's part of intellectual formation, but I also think it's because if you do it long enough, you have to find some source interiorly for producing something that you think is beautiful, knowing that the world will never know it's you. And if you can't be offering that to God, eventually it's going to grate against you in some way. If pride starts to seep in there too much, you're going to be bothered by that and you're going to want to byline. So I kind of had the benefit of just recognizing that I had to do things unseen just to do my job. And then you get other things as you get older too, like having kids where they literally don't care about how you feel or how you act or how you propose yourself. Or if you just want to act, you want to take them out to dinner and be like, I have such a beautiful family. I've raised my kids well. And then that's the one time your kid decides to just start screeching, even though he's never done it before, making you look like a terrible parent. So God will humble you one way or another. So I don't know. Is there a recommendation in there? The only thing I can really recommend for most people, and maybe this is a bad thing to tell your audience, but it's just don't be on social media.
yeah,
Like I literally just I'm not on it anymore.
good.
And there's never been a time in which I've regretted it. There have been times like when you give up having a drink at night where it's like, ooh, I really wish I could have a drink, or I wish I could have a sweet. But just like in Lent, after 2 weeks, that pull stops, and then you
Mhm.
almost can forget that you ever cared about it.
Absolutely, 100%. I always tell my followers, I'm like, "Please, please take a break from social media." Like, um, I think that's so important because I have to take breaks too. I schedule out posts and then sometimes I take a 2-week break from social media and people never know because, you schedule the posts out so far in advance. But those breaks are so necessary. And we really
Mhm.
need to be doing things in the world, helping at soup kitchens, using our hands. Idle hands are the devil's, playground basically. And I think having things to do and helping community, that's going to be more efficacious than anything you do online. Not
Mhm.
anything, but you know what I mean. Like I think, the
Yeah.
little sacrifices we make and things. Yeah, we have this inclination, like you're saying, to post about it. And, that pride can seep in, like, oh, look what I'm doing. But it's really God,
Yeah.
and I think that's one of the reasons, these days, what I try to do is when somebody uh uh, I don't know, they compliment me on something, I'm like, glory to God. I think
Mhm.
it's not that I'm not, I take action and I'm responsible for that action that I take. So I'm like, oh, thank you so much, glory to God. It's not like being like, oh no, it's not me at all. I don't do anything. God
Mhm.
runs the camera, God runs the microphone, God emails people for me. I do the work, so I acknowledge that. But at the same time, God allows the work to touch who it needs to touch and to find who it needs to find. And, having this conversation with you, even like, any of this wouldn't have happened if it wasn't God's will. Um,
Oh, yeah.
and so I definitely think uniting ourselves to God's will and, you know, if we do all we can, if we do everything we can in our state in life and the door closes, well, that's not God's will and you move on. And I think that's
Mhm.
a something that we need to get used to is like, we're tools in God's hands, and we need to embrace that.
Yeah. I would even say too, just like I don't know why this thought came to my head because it almost is like tangentially related. But as you were talking, for some reason, I thought that another good thing for people to do, maybe it was when you said soup kitchens, it's doing something with your hands physically, tangibly. And it doesn't even
Mhm.
need to necessarily be a service activity. Because I know sometimes we can kind of be like,